very much. Thank you.
And our
Bye.
next speaker is indeed the last speaker in this session before our short coffee break. We're going to hear from Rahel Bailie, who is Executive Consultant at ICP, the top 6 things you need to know about localization efficiencies. Well, Rahel, I'll hand the floor over to you. I guess you're keeping it to 6, so we look forward to lots of questions from our audience after this one.
Righto. Well, I am going to, as you said, talk about the 6 top things that you need to know about localization efficiencies. And instead of 6, it's more like in 10 minutes, I'm going to just wrap them all up together because they're all interconnected. So let's get going. The first one is to involve localization expertise at the point of creation. I can't tell you how many times I've worked in places where they create it all, they throw it over the fence, and then the translators, who are usually on the other side of procurement and a translation agency, they're faced with these noun strings that they don't know what to do with. They have no context, and it's impossible for them to talk to the creators. So there should be someone at the beginning who is there and has a view of it and fixes the problems before they go out so that your translation goes more smoothly. So you should have a translation coordinator, manager right up front, in-house, or someone that they can get in touch with. The second is let them do their jobs. There's a Dutch saying that says, don't buy a dog and then do all the barking yourself. And I think what we sometimes forget is how skilled and how complex translation is. And so you need to have people who are experienced, who know their way around translation and localization. And so you want to get a trusted team in place and treat them as a partner as opposed to a vendor. It's not like, the dry cleaning service where you drop off your clothes. This is more like going to the doctor, where you have a trusted partner and you share information with them, and be really frank about, I want to know how much this is going to cost, and how can we reduce our costs? Is there anything that we can do at our end? What can you do at your end? They will work with you if they're a good agency. The next is use semantic structures. And, this is the perfect place to talk about semantic structures because you're talking about data, but there's, semantic content, semantically tagged content always works better than non-tagged content. So unstructured content and content that doesn't conform to what we call intelligent content principles is, software can work with it, but it's a lot harder. So if the more reliability you need, make sure your semantics are there. And there are ways to tag content that are very effective for things like personalization, omni-channel, or even just multi-channel publishing, that that content is tagged to go to different endpoints. The next one is all about inserting data into content. So if you have, and this is a very simple example, if you have a reference data set of country names, and you put that country name in and say, okay, we're going to suck the country name into here. Well, when you're translating, the structure of the sentence may not be the same. So if they translate everything before and then everything after and stick that country name in the middle, will it even make sense in the target language? And should that country name be translated or not? Are you translating things from one market to the other? What happens about number formats? So currency, metrics, sizes and dimensions and so on. All these things you have to think about, and you need to work with the content people. If you're a data person, you need to work with the content person, and the other way around, to say, this is how we are going to be using this in these contexts. And so how do we do it? And we're all about componentizing content right now. We make little kind of Lego blocks of content, and then we build them up into larger pages or web pages or some sort of deliverable at the end. And you can still do that. You just need to plan more carefully at the beginning, and you have to know what the outputs will be and be able to explain what the outputs will be. And then you can send it to the translator with confidence. And often what you'll do is you componentize it, but then you build the end product and you send that end product to the translator, because then they see everything in context. So, the rule of thumb is never send anything to a translator that is less than one sentence long, because that way they can get the entire sentence. And ideally it would be a paragraph, but they can see the rest of the paragraph and then translate that, whatever they need to translate. Number 5, use machine learning wisely. I know that we've just had, the whole chat GPT explosion. Everyone's talking about it. I've gotten my first query about, like, how can we bypass copywriting agencies and get kind of like free copywriting and translations. And it's like, just because you translate something doesn't mean that it's going to be a good translation. And there are things that translators look at that take into account cultural differences. If you're looking at, for example, the picture of a plug, the picture of the plug is going to be different depending on the end country. You don't know if the machine learning is going to pick those differences up or not, and they're going to describe them in the right way or not, or even if they're going to understand certain words out of context. So you need to be constantly training your machine learning. And, maybe a year from now, probably 5 years from now, but let's say a year from now, let's be very optimistic. Things are working really well. And you say, okay, we're going to have this, machine learning doing a lot of the work for us. Great. In the meantime, really have someone check for embarrassing situations, because they will happen. In data, you can take a data set and kind of process it with a lot of accuracy, but with content, you can end up putting two very innocent sentences together, and next thing you know, you have a racist trope, and you really don't want that. And then last but not least, you have to think about governance. And you say, well, what does this have to do with translation? Just because you translate something into another language for another country doesn't mean that that's actually the way something works in that other country. And I've had a Fortune 500 company that was translating things, and the Germans came back and said, I'm sorry, but the banking system doesn't work that way, and so we have to change it. So there are very many differences, like regulatory, legal, cultural, and even in medical, there are differences that end up with critical changes to your content. So you have to look at how you're doing that, but also how you mine the data, and how you where you keep it, how you store it. A friend of mine just had a situation with it wasn't Chat GPT, it was with the Microsoft Bing, where he asked it a question, it gave an answer. He said, could you delete this content, this conversation? And they said, do you want us to delete it? And he said, yes. And then the response was, I'm sorry, I have to keep the conversation for training purposes. And he thought, that doesn't sound like very GDPR to me. So you have to kind of keep all these things in mind when you're translating, because you have to understand the liabilities across countries, and what's allowed and what's not allowed. And that's a very important thing that can sink an otherwise great project. And that's the end, and I hope that we have time for questions, if there are any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Rahel. There are questions. I have questions myself I really want to ask you about. But the first one coming in from our audience: is the use of CAT tools known and understood by professionals requesting localization services from language service providers?
Oh, that so depends. So I've done a presentation about localization and translation tools and processes, and it turned out that in the 400 people there, 300 of them were product managers doing this kind of off the side of their plate, and they had no clue. And then you see others where they understand because they came from a company where there was a different level of expertise or a set of expectations, and then it's fine. So it really does, it's all over the map. And I would suggest that any agency starting with a new client have some sort of a checklist and have some educational material to educate the client, because you can't be guaranteed that the person that you're speaking to has a background in it at all. They might have just been thrown into this out of project management school and said, oh, by the way, we need this translated, call somebody.
Well, a quick question. I mean, you mentioned Chat GPT, and you have a knowledgeable audience here, sort of ripped from the headlines. What's the one thing you wish people understood better about it?
That it's not a panacea. That would be the nutshell. They think that it's going to do all these magic things. And there's this great cartoon from, I think, the Oatmeal, that shows someone trying to talk to the Xbox and have this, you know, it's supposed to have this thing where it's like, turn on my game. Yes, Batman, I'll do what you say. But really what it ends up being is you screaming at the game, and nothing's going right. And this is kind of transposed into our industry, where we think it will do certain things, and you hear stories about it doing certain things, and then you read an article that says, well, actually performs quite poorly.
Okay.
And we see this in where I teach at the university now. We're looking for evidence of people using Chat GPT, and it's kind of easy to spot when somebody tries it, because it's fluffy. It doesn't really say anything, although if you're just reading it, skimming it, sounds good.
Well, you sounded very good, Rahel, so thank you very much for your input. We are going to finish this section of today's event now.